Hey, I'm back! After, what, 2 months? I'm not gonna explain why I haven't made videos and such in the past 2 months, it's just the same old usual thing, life's gotten in the way, and making a video has not been on my top priorities list, but recently I've really wanted to make another video, especially with how much you guys really enjoy my Mario Party content. So with the introduction aside, let's go ahead and get into it and look at the best and worst board in Mario Party 4. Being Mario Party, there are a bunch of factors into what makes a board good and bad. My perception of what makes a board good will be different to what makes your perception of a board good, and that's perfectly fine. This is just my own take on these 4 boards as a die-hard fan of these games, so if you think I'm being a little harsh on some boards, there's nothing wrong with that. I'll be going over things I enjoy and things I don't enjoy with these boards, but if you enjoy the things I don't, again, that's fine. I'd say leave your least favorite boards in the comments and such, but I hate seeing that just as much as most of you do in videos, so you know where the comment section is if you want to say something. I'll be going through these boards from left to right based on the character placement in party mode, so starting off we have Goomba's Greedy Gala. It has 88 spaces on the board with nothing special except having the least amount of battle spaces at 3. This board's main gimmick is by having a roulette wheel in the center of the board between the 4 sections that allows you to access those sections via said roulette wheel. The Goomba will throw a marble on the roulette wheel, and whatever color it lands on is the area the player will be taken to. However, there's also an extra part to this roulette wheel that makes it not so luck-based. Goomba will ask if you want to pay him coins to put the roulette wheel more in your favor to get you to the area that has the star currently. You can pay him either 5, 10, or 20 coins to have an advantage with the roulette wheel. From what I've seen, the spots are predetermined the moment you walk to the roulette wheel, but donating even 5 coins greatly increases your chance of getting on the section with the star from what I've seen and been told. Thank you, Zoomzyke. There's also a chance you'll even land on the star space on the roulette wheel, which will not only give you 20 coins, but allow you to choose whatever path you want to go on, so that's pretty neat. Being divided into 4 sections, naturally, they have to have a way to get out of those sections, and man, they are a real pain sometimes. In all 4 sections of the board, there are die spots in all but the green area where Goombas reside that require you to play a dice game, unless you have a Mega Mushroom, on who can roll higher. If you roll higher, you get to proceed. If not, you are sent back to the beginning, even if you roll the same number. On top of it, if Goomba rolls a 10, you lose by default. The only way to pass this section without having to duel is to be Mega, but that comes with its own risks as well, like missing star spaces. The only happening space on this board belongs to a small game at the top of the board that requires you to go across a crab's table, but a poker chip you're on will be collecting coins in the process. If you go left to right while you're moving in those directions quickly, you should get every single coin if you do it right. The great thing with this is that you'll land one space in front of another happening space the moment you're done with this little mini-game, which means you could use a mini mushroom to have a higher chance of doing it again and actually getting the happening star at the end of the game on top of it. All sections of this board do have different parts to it that would give you more than enough reasons to go to it. Just don't get too carried away in one section because you could lose quite a few turns to one section of the board due to not being able to get out of it. The blue section has a lot going for it with a good connection to the green section and a nice mini game too, so I highly recommend staying in that area as much as you can. The mini game is basically a slot machine where you have to line up 3 numbers to get that many coins, and if you get any of them wrong, you only get 1 coin. If you hit it when the amount of coins you want is before the center, you should get it every time. Some do consider this to be the hardest coin mini game to get down, so don't beat yourself up if you don't get it every time. The other mini game is really easy, being one where 3 Goombas have items, and after spinning around a little bit, you have to pick one of them. It's not hard to see the Goomba's movements, so this one's easy to get down and to get what you want. I do believe this mini game also references my favorite card in a deck of cards, the 3 of Spades, so that's pretty cool. Also, Boo is behind no gate or restriction whatsoever, so he's pretty easy to get to on this board. Speaking of gates, the 2 gates on this board are quite similar since they both have a chance time space right along going through them, and it's also the only way for you to leave the red section without losing to the Goomba while it helps you go from the green section to the blue section on the other side of the board. As you can see, there's plenty of Mega Hammer opportunities that could help you out in this board due to all the opportunities and options presented. A Warp Pipe is a very strategic item in this game because unlike future entries, you swap places with the person you use the Warp Pipe on instead of just warping over to them. This is a very big strategic thing to note too, because you can keep using Warp Pipes to screw other players over by putting them in sections that are not only hard to get out of, but spots that don't have the star space. so do keep that in mind when using warp pipes in this game. Either way you put it though, this board is an absolute luck-based nightmare that you'll definitely have to know a good bit of this game about in order to navigate properly. It definitely isn't the best, especially one to start the video out on. It's got a few flaws, but those flaws can easily be handled properly with some good strategy, so it's not too bad to handle. Definitely not the worst board in the franchise. Second, we have Shy Guy's Jungle Jam. It has the least red spaces, the least chance time spaces, most amount of warp spaces, and the most total spaces out of any board in this game. This board is big. Not like the train board in Mario Party 2 big, but it's still pretty close. This board's main gimmick has a river in the middle of the board, and as you land on these happening spaces in front of the totems, you'll have the option to either make a good wish or a bad wish, and I'd say depending on what wish you made would determine what happens, but it doesn't. This game is really good at making you think you had a choice with these board gimmicks, and I'm very glad they give you the option to do stuff like this or not in later entries. If your wish is appreciated, the totem will be happy and nothing will happen. If it doesn't, however, the board will be flooded for a number of turns, depending on the number the Shy Guy's forehead has on it. When the map is flooded, there's no way to cross the board except through Klepto, which also gives you the opportunity to have more coins, especially if the volcano erupts, but that doesn't happen that often. If you're going across the board with Klepto, do look at the map and consider your options, because until the flood ends, you'll have no way of going back over except for this nice Shy Guy with his raft in the middle of the board. He'll take you across for a random price, varying from 5 to 20 coins most of the time. If Klepto is available, I'd highly recommend taking him instead of the raft, because you'll actually get some coins back from Klepto, and you won't have to fork over too many to begin with. The first mini game on this board is called Treasure Tree, which lets you grab one of the 3 items hanging from a tree. If you time your jump right, you should be able to get the item you want as it sways around. The other mini game, How High Fly Guy, is a pure button mashing game. You have to mash A as quickly as you can to wind up a fly guy, and the higher it goes, the more coins you get. Just press A as fast as you can, that's all I can suggest. You'll get some coins regardless. There's a gate on the right side of the board, which is what you'll have to go through to come across the Shy Guy and the raft, and has quite a few spaces before you get to the Fly Guy minigame, so don't expect to get through all of it with just one mini mushroom. Aside from the raft, there isn't anything worth noting that this gate takes you to aside from the happening spaces for the totem, but that has its cons like I mentioned before. The left gate guards a star, the only chance time spaces you'll see on this board, and naturally, boo. Can you tell they really pushed the mechanic of the Mega and Mini Mushrooms in this title? Being the biggest board means you'll have to take a lot of things into consideration, and whether it's the Flood, the Kleptos, the Mini Mushroom Gates, the player placements, the mini games, and or all of the above. Shy Guy's Jungle Jam is definitely a board you want to play on when you have a bunch of people with you and a lot of time to kill with a lot of turns. Just because it's third on the list and bronze is associated with being third place does not mean I have any bias towards Toad's Midway Madness, because of one gimmick I will get to in a minute. It has 86 spaces on the board with the least amount of blue spaces, the least amount of Bowser spaces, and the most amount of mushroom spaces. Being a Toad-based board, I can kinda see why it has the most mushroom spaces. Before I go into things with this board though, I have to give the biggest complaint I mentioned a second ago that I have with this board, which is the teacup ride at the very beginning of this board. This is such a huge design flaw at the very beginning of the very first board shown to you in this game, and I don't know why they thought this would be a good idea. No matter how you play this board, someone is going to end up stuck at this beginning section of the board for the first several turns of the game. And depending on how many turns you have in this game, some people may be stuck on this side of the board for most of the game with no way around it except for one small space on this entire beginning section. That is unfair as shit, and I don't know why they thought this was a good addition. If it had been somewhere else on the board, even a few more spaces so you could at least go a different path and continue further onto the board one other way, that would have been perfectly fine, but no. Yeah, there's a star space here, but what are the odds you're going to be at the very beginning of the board with the arrow facing up by the time that star spawns? I still haven't seen it happen myself when playing this board, so it's safe to say the odds of it happening are extremely slim. Of course, there are 4 mushroom spaces to kind of make up for this, but that still doesn't excuse the teacup ride because there's still a chance you aren't going to land on those spaces. The only saving grace is a warp space, but there's only one of them here. If you added a few extra to the beginning section, that would make it somewhat more bearable since you could have a decent chance of landing on one and be able to go to another player while skipping the teacup ride altogether. But again, no, there's just one of them in 14 spaces, mind you, that you have in this loop. Yeah, 14 spaces. That means if you don't have any Mega Mushrooms, it's going to take multiple turns just to loop around this beginning section. Sure, there's a happening space right after the teacup ride on the left, but unless every single person lands on this happening space, someone's going to be left behind in this beginning section at no fault of their own. And that is completely unfair to that one player. This beginning section alone could put Toad's Midway Madness as a contender for the worst board in this game, but aside from that horrible beginning section, the board's actually really good. The roller coaster section is a nice wild card in this board, since if you land on any of the happening spaces on the track, the rocket cart will go across the board and cause any players on the track to be moved to specific spaces on either track, depending on where the rocket cart is on the board. The fact that you could also ride the roller coaster to the other side of the board and get coins along with pushing other players to the opposite side of the board is a nice touch as well. There's a second teacup ride in this map, which is placed much better because for one, it's not at the beginning of the board, and two, you're not constantly stuck on one side of the board going either way. The ride being pointed upwards at default is good since the first person that comes across it will be able to not only come across more of the board, the teacup pointing to the right will loop you back to the track section, but it will allow you to have access to the item shop as well as Boo on top of it. Next to the teacup ride is also a mini mushroom gate, which will take you to not only a chance time space, but a mini game as well. This is the Space Rocket minigame. While the placement for mini games could be a little closer towards the mini mushroom gate, I couldn't see it being anywhere else on the board, so I'm perfectly fine with its placement. The mini game isn't that bad either, guaranteeing you at least 5 coins and at most 20. The other mini game on this board, the item mini game, the merry-go game, is a pretty good mini game as well. I'm going to be saying mini game way too much in this video, guaranteeing you at least something by stopping the horse and seeing which item it stops on. It's not that hard, just stop on the item you want when it lines up with you, and you'll get it, simple as that. There is another mini mushroom gate on this board. While it doesn't look that appealing to have 2 red spaces right after the gate, I would prefer taking this over going further down the track since it not only does save you on spaces, but it also can keep you out of the beginning teacup ride limbo I mentioned before a lot, in case that said ride is positioned to do that. If you're stuck in this beginning limbo, you're going to waste many turns and not have many options out of it, so do what you can to avoid it. Unless you have a warp pipe because of what I've mentioned earlier, warp pipes are big strategic items in this game. The mini Mega Hammer is also a good item, I have to say, on top of it, because this board, due to having the teacup rides, if you know what you're going to do on this board, definitely use something like that and do it. The mini Mega Hammer is also a very good item to have in this game, especially on this board due to these teacup rides. If you know what you're doing on this board, do it. Otherwise, stay as far away as you can from the beginning section to what is otherwise not that bad of a board and a pretty decent middle entry to start out the next generation of Mario parties on the squared system. I just wish that beginning section wasn't a pain to get through. I hope you guys have the lights on for this next board because this one is a really spooky one, being Boo's Haunted Bash. It has 76 spaces, which is the least amount in this entry, as well as having the least amount of happening spaces at only 2. Dang. That alone immediately makes this board a battle for the happening star. There are multiple transparent paths on this board that disappear and reappear anytime you visit the Red Boo with no way on whether or not you want them to disappear. If you come across them, they're going to either reappear or disappear, regardless if you want that or not. Regardless on whether or not you have a choice on turning the bridges on or off doesn't mean you can't build strategy around it though, since removing or adding those paths will affect everyone on the board. Having these paths turned off will also activate another board gimmick at the top left of said board called the Mystery Train. This gimmick allows you to ride one of 4 coffins across the board, again without your say mind you, to one of many graveyards on the board while taking any players you come across with you in the process. You don't get to look at the map before you ride this, so if you're going to a specific path on this board to a specific graveyard knowing you're going to ride this mystery train, make sure you know where you're going. Just remember that wherever you're going, players you pick up along the path will be coming with you, so if you're going to Boo, I'd recommend going solo. Just above Boo is a mini game for this board, which is called Horn o' Plenty. You just push one part of the trumpet and you get an item from it. It's random, but you get an item out of it at least. Now that we've gotten the first two gimmicks of this board out of the way, let's get into the final and, in my opinion, best gimmick to this board, if not in the entire game. Remember those two happening spaces I mentioned at the beginning when talking about this board? Well, turns out they go to a very specific gimmick to what is called Big Boo. You have to land on these happening spaces at least 3 times in order to summon him, and if you're fortunate enough to not only do this but have a bunch of coins with you, you will be able to make a game-changing decision. Because for 15 coins, he can take upwards of over 75 coins away from your opponents, and for 150 coins, he can take a star from each player, and it doesn't matter if they have a Gadlight or not, it will not work. This is easily one of the hardest and most broken gimmicks to use in Mario Party, least of all this game. The coins stolen also go towards the coin star, so if you don't have enough to steal a star, you could easily get one at the end of the game with the coin star. You can still use the 150 coin option to steal a star from every player, even if not all of them have a star, but I would only use this as a last resort if it came down to it. If I'm paying 150 coins, I'm going to make sure it's put to damn good use by taking a star from every player. If you don't have enough to steal a star from everybody but want to, don't worry about that since there's just another Boo not that many spaces ahead of Big Boo. However, it's not that easy getting to Big Boo. Not only do you have to land on these two happening spaces at least 3 times, but there is a red Boo bridge right before it, and the mystery train goes right past the happening spaces. So the only time you can actually get to this area is while the red Boos are active, and even then you still have to actually land on the happening spaces 3 times just to bring them out. That means you will have to have gone around the board at least 3 times before you can even use Big Boo, and you may run out of turns before you get to him. So while it is a very broken gimmick, it's evened out by being very hard to get to. If you see an opponent coming across Big Boo, do everything you can to prevent that from happening. Hell, if you're that petty, you could even call it out and have the other 2 players on your side to team up against the player coming across Big Boo, and you can all do everything you can to stop them. A Mega Mini Hammer would be a great thing to mess up their game, or you can just say screw it to the other 2 players and use a Warp Pipe to get there yourself. Hey, it's Mario Party. Friendships are thrown out the door when it comes to these games. Well, they are for me at least. That out of the way, let's look at the mini-gates. One of them is located on the middle path of the board, and one is located as you're looping back around the board from the top. The one coming from the top has 3 chance spaces, along with being right before the mini-game. The other mini-gate in the middle of the board leads to not only a star space, but the other mini-game to this board, Rhythm and Boo. It's not that hard, just press the button shown as you go across the piano, just don't wait too long or get the wrong button, or you'll get less coins. The buttons don't repeat though, so keep that in mind as well. I don't know if you can tell, but the right side of this board is definitely more sought after than the left side, and unfortunately, without a Warp Pipe, you're going to have to go completely around this board before you're able to get back to the right side, but it's definitely worth the trip. With all those board gimmicks and different ways to go about the board, it's easy to see why this board is picked more often than not in terms of being the best board in Mario Party 4. However, we still have 2 more boards to get through, so let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. Second to last, we have Koopa's Seaside Soiree. This board has 86 spaces. It has the least amount of red spaces, the most amount of happening spaces at 14, which is a lot for this Mario Party game, especially considering the last board I talked about. The most amount of chance time spaces, and the least amount of mushroom spaces. The main gimmick for this board is the Koopa Cabana. Admittedly, it's not the worst thing in the world if the cabana is not very large. Whenever you land on it, you do get a happening space. However, you have to pay to stay at the cabana, which can vary based on the level the cabana is at. If you don't have that many coins, I would say land on these happening spaces, unless you want an opponent to land on it while the cabana has a high coin count. If that's the case, you can use a mini Mega Hammer and make them mini in order for them to have a higher chance of landing on the space and losing a lot of coins in the process. Just make sure you don't do it too often because you may accidentally give them the happening star. You can tell how many coins are invested in the cabana based on what level it is. While level 1 isn't too bad at 1 to 14 coins, but level 4 is a whopping 41 coins at least. So if it ever gets that high, do your best to try and avoid landing on these if you've got some coins. Being Mega also means you don't have to pay the Koopa, so all of that makes the Koopa Cabana not a horrible gimmick for this board because it's actually quite the strategic gimmick. However, there are 2 Okiki banana peel spots on both sides of the board, and these really knock this board down a peg for me. Why? Because it's a luck-based gimmick completely out of your hands. There is no consistency to which side you'll end up landing on. No matter how hard you try, it's completely random, taking away your ability to choose which side of the board you land on, and man, it really drags this board down because of it. The only way you can choose which path you want to take is if you have the Bowser suit. This is a big pain because if you don't go to the upper half of the board from time to time, you'll miss out on this mini mushroom gate that leads to Boo on this board. You'll have to rely on a coin flip on this board in order to try and get to Boo every single time, and you will have to have a mini mushroom on top of it. If you ever do get to Boo on this stage, don't hesitate to take a star, because getting to Boo in this stage is by far the most difficult in the entire game. If you see anybody else on this path, that would be a really good time to use a warp pipe if you've got one. There's also a mini mushroom gate on the right side of the board, and it will allow you to get to a mini game and... What?! 4 chance time spaces in a row?! Okay, if you are in a situation in Mario Party where you need to do something absolutely chaotic with little to nothing to lose, this mini mushroom gate is your best bet. The only problem being that you have to rely on a coin flip as well to get there, just like the other mini mushroom gate. And while I'm on it, let's look at the board lineup for this mini mushroom gate. It would be very difficult to actually be able to pull off getting through this mini mushroom gate because of this coin flip gimmick on the board. My best recommendation to get to this mini mushroom gate is to use a super mini mushroom if you haven't passed the Ukiki. Speaking of the mini mushroom gate, beyond this one is a mini game where you get to pick an item based on what watermelon it's in. Your character is spun around and your input is altered, but take a few seconds to get used to it and it's not hard to pick which melon you want. There's also a mini game on this board that doesn't require you to go past a mini mushroom gate, surprisingly, so this board's got that going for it at least. I'd say it's mostly up to chance because there doesn't seem to be any indication as to which line has the biggest fish. Many of these happening spaces actually don't belong to the cabana. They're actually another gimmick on this board where you'll go next to a dock with a picture of a fruit on it and a dolphin will take you to the other dock with the same fruit on it. While I don't like the fact that you don't have a choice on whether or not you want to go, there is some good strategy to it because it will quickly get you across the board and towards many star spaces on top of it. The watermelon one is the only one where you can actually get coins. It's a nice feature for the watermelon one since it's so long. The one thing I will give this board credit for as well is that the developers really thought through the star spaces because most of them are located around the docking spaces, which makes it very easy to go across the board and get a star without wasting too much time getting to it. Koopa's Seaside Soiree is definitely a contender in this game for the worst board, but considering it's the second to last board we've talked about, I wouldn't say it's the worst board yet. We still have one final board to get through. And that board, which you can't unlock without playing story mode, is Bowser's Gnarly Party. It has the most amount of blue spaces and ties for the least amount of warp spaces. It actually has one less space than Shy Guy's Jungle Jam, so it's also a big board as well. Surprisingly enough, there's no gimmicks to this board with the Bowser's faces in terms of adding more onto the board. A big potential they just didn't think about, I'm guessing. There's multiple stone bridges on this board, and every time they're walked across, no matter how big or small you are, the bridge crumbles apart after it's walked over 3 times. It breaks, and a new bridge is formed on the other pathway. Similar to Toad's Midway Madness, forming a different bridge on a different path not only limits your ability to go across the board, but makes you consider your next move on how far you are away from those bridges, so you'll either go across the bridge and get to where you want to go, or let someone pass you so you can go on the newly formed bridge after they've crumbled the previous one. Since it's his board, Bowser will actually be on a star space that is inactive the entire time you're playing this board. When you pass him, he'll take away half of your coins at normal size, or give you 50 if you don't have any, so remember that. If you come across him while mini, he'll use his fire breath to knock you to a special Bowser starting section to the board, which has 2 Bowser faces immediately afterwards with a chance time space in between them. There's a blue path that is unbreakable and may swap up or down every time Bowser moves, which is every time a star is collected, so keep an eye out for that. Coming across Bowser in your Mega form is the best thing you can do because he'll challenge you to 2 separate minigames, being Bowser Wrestling or Panels of Doom. If you lose, he'll take half of your coins as usual and stay in the spot he was before you came across him. If you win, he'll actually leave the board entirely until you collect a star, so that's pretty neat. Panels of Doom is mostly luck-based, while Bowser Wrestling has some strategy to it. Just press L and R alternatively, and keep an eye out for mushrooms while you're wrestling him, because if you get one, you're all but guaranteed to win. If Bowser gets one though, you're probably going to lose. Funny enough, if you pass Bowser while in a Bowser suit, he'll give you 50 coins. Just be sure you have no better use for it. Nice to see Bowser appreciates fans meeting him not only in board games, but at conventions too, which I have done. I'm sorry, that was a bad transition. I just like flexing voice actors I've met as much as I can. Back to the board. Another gimmick revolving around Bowser with this board is a thing called Bowser Magic, where every 4 turns, starting after turn 6, he turns all the players on the board mini for that turn. You also cannot use items. There's a small chance he'll wait an extra turn or two, but that's rare, so don't count on it. The only time I would use this magic to my advantage is if you were right in front of a mini-gate and planned on going through it. Speaking of, like every board before, there's 2 mini-gates to this board, one on the left and one on the top, with both taking you to a mini-game. The mini-game on the bottom is called the Koopa Kid Shuffle. 3 items are placed in 1 box apiece, and you're allowed to pick 1. Seems pretty simple, except you're not getting the one you picked. That one is off limits. You can pick another one, and even then, there's a 50-50 chance Koopa Kid will either give you the box you picked the second time, or just give you the box that wasn't picked. Pick the item you don't want the first time, so you're guaranteed to get at least something you kind of wanted. The mini-game on top, Break Bullet Bill, is another button masher, and it's quite the opposite compared to how high Fly Guy. I recommend not coming across this mini-game unless you are really good at button mashing, because if you aren't, you are out of luck with this one. The happening spaces are located next to Bowser head statues, which will burn you, as well as any items you're carrying. The fact that there is a statue right before Koopa Kid's item shuffle is a real pain, because you could land on one of these and lose the mini mushroom you were going to use for that mini-game, or end up coming short and losing another item you had on top of it. With that in mind, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't bother coming across the Koopa Kid Shuffle, so if you're not good at button mashing and don't want to rely partially on good luck, as well as possibly losing an item, if not all of your items on top of it, you're kind of, well, completely out of luck, pun intended, for this board's mini games. However, the statues do have the only happening spaces on the board, so you're going to have to come across it a few times in this game if you want a shot at the happening star, which means you're going to have to sacrifice some items. If you have no items though, it's not a big deal. Again, mini mega hammers and warp pipes are important with this board, least of all this game, and it applies to this board just as much as it applies to all the other boards I've already talked about. For a game that wants you to collect as many mini and mega mushrooms as you can, they really didn't use many board gimmicks to make that much of a difference if you're mega or mini. For one, if you do have a lot of them in this game due to the spaces, they didn't really put that much into changing the way the board works with the mushrooms. For a game that has a lot of mushroom spaces, they really didn't put that much into changing the way the board works with the mushrooms you use. A really big missed opportunity if you ask me, but that was probably the least of their worries in this game since it was the first big step in 3D Mario, so I'll let it slide. It doesn't take anything away from the game, I just wish it had added more to the game as well. So being the board based around the big baddie himself, Bowser's Gnarly Party is a board where you need to keep an eye on where the bridges are and where Bowser is so you can figure out your best strategy. And that is just about everything I could think of that is worth mentioning about these boards without going into every specific little detail, and I've already gone into enough detail as it is, as you can tell from the length of this video. With all of that said, what board do I think is the worst in this game? While they all have their faults and they all have some great things about them, I wouldn't say any of these boards are horrible. Just which one is the least good? In my opinion, it has to be Goomba's Greeted Gala, from the random chance of you getting somewhere random on the board with the roulette wheel to not having an actual good, consistent way of getting to other sides of the board, because the Goomba, there's a good chance you're not even going to get to another side of the board because you could beat the dice roll. And even if you lose the dice roll, you're sent back to the beginning, which takes you right back to the roulette wheel. There's too much chance and there's too many factors to go into it. There's just not enough strategy and too much luck around Goomba's Greeted Gala for me, and that's why, in my opinion, is the least good board in this Mario Party title. The best board, I think it goes without saying, it is collectively agreed that Boo's Haunted Bash is the best one, and I can easily see why, because not only does it have the least amount of spaces, but it also has just the most strategy, from the big Boo to the red boost to the coffin to the mini games to the perfect Boo placement, as well as paths being cut off to prevent you from getting to stars. There is a lot to enjoy about that board. Even if it's not one of the best boards in Mario Party, it is in my opinion the best board in Mario Party 4. So my picks from least good to best Mario Party 4 boards are as follows: Goomba's Greedy Gala, Koopa's Seaside Soiree, Bowser's Gnarly Party, Toad's Midway Madness. Yes, the beginning gimmick is a big pain in the ass, but the rest of the board is so much better. Shy Guy's Jungle Jam, and Boo's Haunted Bash. If you don't agree with these picks, like I said at the beginning of the video, that's perfectly fine. You know where the comment section is. You can give me your input on the video and what you think is the best and least good board in Mario Party. I would love to see what you guys have to say. With all of that said and done, I do believe this is the end of the video. Again, my apologies for taking so long to edit this video. A lot of stuff, as usual, life has just come up in my way, and making videos hasn't been my biggest priority, but I hope to get around to making it a big priority sometime. But until then, thanks to Jen for helping me make this video, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, take care, and have a good one.